All right, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Bertin Louie. I am president-elect of the Association of Black Anthropologists and associate professor of anthropology and African American and Africana studies at the University of Kentucky. I'm the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you to what will be an important and stimulating discussion. Now, in the past, almost all professional anthropologists spent their careers in some form of educational institution. Today, hundreds of anthropologists hold full-time positions that allow them to apply their expertise in governmental agencies, nonprofit groups, private corporations, and international bodies. These institutions and organizations employ anthropologists because they believe that people trained in the discipline will help them in problem solving. In recognition of the growth of non-educational employment opportunities, the American Anthropological Association recognizes applied anthropology, or also known as practicing anthropology, as a separate subfield. This roundtable will discuss the varied paths with our panelists, members of the Association of Black Anthropologists, took to becoming practicing anthropologists. The event will highlight their experiences and contributions to applied anthropological work in society as a whole. This discussion will also introduce audience members to other possible career paths in light of the restructuring of academia due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as highlight successful Black practicing anthropologists. Now, before I introduce members of our distinguished roundtable, I'd like to discuss some ground rules for today's event. Please mute your microphones and stop your cameras during this discussion period. That's gonna last about up to an hour. You're also welcome to write questions as they come along in the chat feature of Zoom. Now let me talk a little bit about the format. I'm gonna ask a question that each roundtable member will answer. We'll have up to about an hour of discussion, and the rest of the time during this event was devoted to questions from the audience with answers from our guests. Now, let me introduce our panelists. Robert Adams Jr. is a senior consultant with ThomasLeland, focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, organizational change, and mindful leadership. Previously, he served as the Senior Vice President for Programs at the NEA Foundation in Washington, D.C., Interim Chief Operating Officer at the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, and also as Program Officer at the Fetzer Institute in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Robert holds a PhD in Cultural Anthropology from the University of Texas at Austin. He's held various academic research and advisory positions at the City University of New York's Graduate Center, or CUNY, DePaul University, and also the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In 2008, he was a Fulbright Scholar and visiting professor at the Catholic University of Sao Paulo. Robert has conducted fieldwork in Brazil, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, Mozambique, Portugal, Spain, South Africa, and the United States. Our next participant is Raymond Codrington. He is the Executive Director of High Arts. Based in East Harlem, New York, High Arts works at the intersection of the arts and social justice through theater, performance, and visual art. Raymond previously served as Senior Research Fellow at the Aspen Institute's Roundtable on Community Change. He was founding director of the Julian C. Dixon Institute for Cultural Studies and curator in the Department of Anthropology at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. He held the Sandy Boyd Postdoctoral Fellowship at the Field Museum's Center for Cultural Understanding and Change. He has worked in a number of consulting roles, including curator with the Department of Cultural Affairs and the Office of the Mayor, and that was with the City of Los Angeles. He was also anthropologist in residence at New York Hall of Science, and also co-director of the Hip Hop Education Center at New York University. He holds a PhD in Cultural Anthropology from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. I'll also add that he's also been a past ABA president. Dr. Arvenita Washington Cherry is a sociocultural and educational anthropologist with expertise on the African diaspora, education, and topics of race, ethnicity, and racism. Dr. Washington Cherry is a senior director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Maximus. As founder of Phoenix Cultural Resources, LLC, she consulted, trained, and provided assessment and evaluation on social justice issues for 16 years, working with nonprofit and for-profit organizations, museums, and in philanthropy. In addition to her consulting and research, Dr. Washington Cherry has designed and taught several undergraduate and graduate courses on race, racism, race relations, gender, and research methods, and is faculty at American University and University of Maryland, a global campus. Dr. Washington Cherry received a Doctor of Philosophy degree in anthropology with a concentration in race, gender, and social justice, and with the highest honor of distinction from the American University. She also earned a Master's of Arts degree in public anthropology, also from the American University, and a graduate certificate in nonprofit studies from Johns Hopkins University. She has completed a competitive postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or UMBC, in the Department of Africana Studies, and with the Language, Literacy, and Cultural Program, as well as a Scholar in Residence program at the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center. And last but not least, we have Dr. Alicia Arwin, who is an applied cultural anthropologist. She received her PhD from the University of South Florida in applied anthropology. She's the owner and founder of Consider the Culture, a firm that incorporates anthropological knowledge to governmental, community, educational, and religious institutions on the social construction of race, cultural belief systems and practices, language, ethnography, and community engagement. Dr. Winn currently serves as consultant in the preservation and community building efforts for the City of West Palm Beach's Community Redevelopment Agency, CRA, project director for the Palm Beach County African American Oral History Virtual Pilot Project, and also serves as adjunct professor at Palm Beach Atlantic University's School of Ministry, infusing community-engaged research and applied anthropology in the classroom. So I want to welcome all of the roundtable participants and all of our guests. I would like to start with a general question to the panel of members of the roundtable. If you could just discuss in a couple of minutes your path to becoming a practicing anthropologist, and we'll start with Robert Adams.
Yes, thank you for the invitation to join this panel today. I would say that my pathway was totally by accident. I went to graduate school in anthropology out of curiosity, and the continued sort of like exploration of difference and cultural habits that happen all over the world. And I think when I moved to New York City, my late wife went to Columbia, and I had to try to figure out how we were going to make it in New York City. And that opened me up to new possibilities. And, I would say that Raymond, who's on this panel, helped me to kind of see new opportunities and helped to plug me into different communities that allowed me to explore new options. And so a lot of what has happened in my career was really just by accident, that I figured out that the skills that I learned in graduate school at the University of Texas allowed me to do a whole bunch more, allowed me to run projects, allowed me to sort of be an administrator. They just gave me a whole skill set that I finally in New York City discovered how valuable they were outside of the classroom.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Robert. Next, we're gonna go to Raymond. You can talk about a little bit about your path.
Sure. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for pulling this together, organizing this, Bertin. Great panel. It's great to see everybody. The path, I mean, it's a bit circuitous. I mean, I think it's, for me, after leaving graduate school, taking a postdoc at the Field Museum, that started moving me away slowly from sort of traditional academic jobs, being able to have a position whereby I was doing research, some project management, exhibition development, and curating, really opened me up to the opportunities that you could do, the things that you could do with an anthropology degree outside of the academy. So really the work around museums and in museums was really what started me down the practicing anthropology route. And from there, it started to build the positions that I gained access to. Another one was another museum job. Then went into consulting. So they're essentially sort of building blocks around working with cultural institutions, at the same time applying some degree of research and practice to these positions. So it really gave me an opportunity to spread my wings as an anthropologist and explore some different routes. From there, my network took me to different positions. So one, I think I developed a different kind of skill set as a result of starting out in museums and the positions that I took subsequently. But then also from there, the network exposed me to different jobs. So moving to the Aspen Institute in policy, I'd always wanted to work at a think tank. So I had that opportunity. But for the most part, ideas are around cultural change, adaptation, race, class inequality have been themes that I've been able to explore in different types of positions. So I've always considered myself a practicing anthropologist, regardless of the field or the position that I was in. But I think one thing that I do feel anthropology gave me was to be both a generalist, but also being able to apply that knowledge and that skill set specifically, being able to translate that into different positions. And that's been really important throughout my career. So it's been a bit circuitous, but I felt a few core themes and skill sets that have gotten me through, and I use them to this day.
All right, thank you very much. Next, can we have Dr. Washington Cherry respond to the question of discussing your path to becoming a practicing anthropologist?
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you for having me and for pulling this together. So the backstory is I actually was a middle school science teacher. My undergrad degree is in biology, and then I did a master's in teaching from Hampton University, and I found myself in a classroom where I didn't have the language for it, but I felt like a practicing anthropologist to some degree. When I started grad school for the doctorate, I was a broke grad student on full fellowship, and I couldn't work. And so I had to think very quickly, how am I going to eat? And so I paired my skill sets that I had and developed a consulting business shortly after I got into grad school. And it was probably by the grace of God, someone took a chance and said, hey, let's turn this kind of internship situation that you have here into some consulting when this is finished. And it started from there, quite honestly, and it was on the ground training, pairing kind of this academic, theoretical knowledge with how do you problem solve and how do you include people in that process. So some of this was birthed out of being hungry, literally hungry, and then some of it was just birthed out of really wanting to make my research and the things I care about accessible to a broader range of folks, to also be able to take on some work around problem solving and change, quite honestly. So I'll stop talking here.
Thank you so much. And now next, Dr. Alicia Winn. Could you talk a little bit about, you could discuss your path to becoming a practicing anthropologist, please?
Okay, can you all hear me? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's funny that everyone kind of has, we're talking about this path because it's a path that's very unexpected. You don't plan for it, but you're like searching for it, and then you end up kind of finding it, or it finds you. And so I was actually a sociology major at Bethune-Cookman University, and the only actually, which is a great thing, the only cultural anthropology class that was offered, and I needed that class to graduate with my degree in sociology. And so I took that class, and I was probably one of the few that really was more excited than what people thought I should be. And I said, I want to do anthropology, but then I kind of stumbled into applied anthropology with taking more and more classes, and then I went into the graduate program at Georgia State University that has an applied background. So I learned more about applied anthropology through taking more classes at Georgia State University and being immersed in a community and the city of Atlanta. And so, through working with organizations and community groups, and with Georgia, in partnership with Georgia State, is where I really found applied anthropology. And, that was it for me, and it took off there into going more into, and I don't want to go into the second question, but that's kind of how I had my start. It was like more of a journey for me as I was taking classes and the foundation of an HBCU and really the activism that comes with being on a campus of a HBCU, and that kind of led me to like exploring how can I impact my communities even more, and then the connecting anthropology with that, it was just the icing on the cake for me.
Excellent. So why don't we stay with you, Dr. Winn, and go into the next question. And the next question being, did you enter a program that focused on practicing anthropology, or did you have to create a path for yourself in the midst of a traditional PhD program where graduate students are trained to become professors in academia? And
Okay.
I'll repeat that question for the other other roundtable members.
Okay, so I guess I'll just keep adding with Georgia State. And so as I started with Georgia State, because I wasn't familiar, I was still learning about anthropology, and then I kind of, so on top of that was applied with Georgia State's program. And so through my advisors and this idea of theory and praxis is what, I started being educated about. And so when I finished my degree at Georgia State, my MA degree, I wanted to pursue an advanced degree in anthropology, and I wanted to continue this applied work. And so I ended up applying for the University of South Florida in Tampa. And so I received my degree from the University of South Florida in Tampa, which is a specialized program specifically in applied anthropology. So my PhD is specifically in applied anthropology. So my training, thankfully, I had the great opportunity to be trained as an applied anthropologist. So all of my professors, all of my courses, all of the work that we have done as far as ethnography and community has been geared towards using anthropological knowledge to solve a problem. And so whether it's through our internships, through our coursework, everything was geared towards that. So I had the privilege to be surrounded by applied anthropologists and those who wanted to pursue applied anthropology. So I could say I was kind of groomed for my job. And we can talk a little bit more how that kind of shifted and navigated through even more, but my foundation is applied anthropology. And so I'm privileged to be able to have experienced that.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Washington Cherry, did you enter a program that focused on practicing anthropology, or did you have to create a path for yourself in the midst of a traditional PhD program where graduate students are trained to become professors in academia?
For me, it was a little of a both and. The master's portion of the program is in public anthropology. I felt like at the time they were still developing that program. And I got most of my training, quite honestly, from people in the field, from having real, time experiences in philanthropy, working with nonprofits, working in the community, learning how to, conduct focus groups and interviews, and learning how to translate that data into action. And so I got a little bit of it at American where I was matriculating, but honestly, I think it was working with folks across disciplines who were, getting dirty and trying to make change happen that way.
Great, great. Dr. Codrington, so were you in a traditional program, or did you have to kind of create a path for yourself in the program that you were already in?
Sure. No, so my program was not an applied program, and I didn't necessarily receive training in applied anthropology in my program, but there were professors that were working in that tradition and using those methods. And it wasn't really, and students also were using more applied methods. And there was a pretty big distinction between people that are interested in applied or using applied in their work, even in a traditional program, and those that weren't. But there was space enough. There was space if you wanted to explore that, at least with me and my advisor, Lee Mullings. And then when I went to my postdoc at the Field Museum with Ala Kawali, I felt as though I was prepared enough to do applied work, but I was essentially learning on the go. So formally, classically trained applied anthropologist. I didn't leave graduate school as that, but I felt as though I had some exposure to applied anthropology when I was in my program, and then I was able to build on that when I took my postdoc.
Excellent. So Dr. Adams, did you enter a program that focused on practicing anthropology, or did you have to create a path for yourself?
I think it's mainly creating a path for myself. Texas was definitely, especially that was when the diaspora program was just starting, was much more of a, academia type oriented program. It really came about from moving to New York and trying to figure things out there. And I think that what I really discovered is that my area studies work, doing Latin American studies in conjunction with anthropology, really prepared me to see the world so that I could think about how to interact and contribute to policy and other aspects that I could see translate immediately into non-academic jobs. And so that's kind of how I ended up, is really through just kind of like figuring out. Somebody came to me and said, hey, we have multiple project teams around the world in 5 countries. We need somebody that knows these multiple languages and that can run these teams. Would you be willing to do it? And I said, sure. And that really was my area studies that gave me the foundation. And then I realized how to sort of apply my anthropology to that.
Great, excellent, excellent. I want to touch on a point that was brought up by one of you, by Dr. Codrington, and see if you could talk a little bit more in depth about this. And we'll start with you, Raymond. If you could talk a little bit about the importance of networking for you in kind of finding these different types of positions that you've been in. And then what I'll do is, after everybody answers a question about, the networking question, I want to follow up with like a question about, some of the past positions you've had.
I mean, I think obviously network is important in all positions and all fields, whether you're applied or not. For me, the network was especially important because I think we've all sort of talked around, well, most of us making our own path and maybe not necessarily being sort of trained as an applied anthropologist, but it feels that when I went into the field, when I became, so my career started and I started to move through positions, one is just how to find jobs. So that was just a very nuts and bolts of networking and the importance of networks, but also the idea that you can continue on this path. There will be work for you. There are positions. There is support, both collegial and organizational support for you. So as working in applied anthropology, I didn't feel so alone, like I was out there. So just doing this by myself. But I was in a pretty good network of people that were anthropologists and other academics that were doing work in applied settings. And this is a range of settings. So this is policy, cultural institutions, research. So that was good. It's really sort of good to be part of a supportive network where you see people applying the discipline in similar ways that you are, so you don't feel so alone. But you're also using this network to just find out about sort of jobs, positions that are opening up. And it also helped me to really start to push my thinking around anthropology by seeing what other people were doing in my network. So the network serves several functions.
Thank you. Dr. Washington Chair, I saw you nodding a lot. How did like networking, or could you say something a little bit about networking and how that helped you gain certain positions?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really took me being in the right place at the right time and meeting people that would, listen and take a chance, but also was about that mentorship and guidance. And once I had that and I was working on honing my skills, it opened the doors for other opportunities. I was allowed to be in the meetings and spaces that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be in. And as a result of that, it really helped to shape my career. And so I think it's also important for us to, continue to think, how do we extend what's been given to us? How do we help? I mean, sessions like these are really crucial, but also just for people who want to do this work, how do we provide mentorship opportunities and advice and guidance and those things? And those were certainly things I had, and had I not had them, it would have been a very different path. It continues to be something that helps me, even though I've been doing this for a while now.
All right. How about you, Dr. Adams? How has networking helped for you?
Oh, it's been a key. The position I have now, it's somebody that I went to graduate school with at the University of Texas, who was the co-founder of the company I work for now. Throughout my career, the people that I've worked for didn't necessarily understand how anthropology and applied anthropology could be useful for them. But it's been people in my network that have explained to them how I could be of service to the different places that I've worked at. And so it's really been super key to getting positions, throughout my career.
Thank you. How about you, Dr. Winn? What's the importance of networking for you in your path as an applied or practicing anthropologist?
Oh, it's very important. And it's kind of like one door and then another door opens. So it's a little different from, saying, okay, I need to go here and connect with someone and show my business card. It's a different type of environment in applied anthropology, because your networking may be, you're in a meeting with policymakers or decision makers about the city on one project. And then after that meeting, you're talking about, what they're doing in the future for a grant, and then you happen to be in a room to talk to them about that, and they are looking for someone to be a part of this project. And so you're in the right place at the right time, as someone stated. And so your networking is, you already being maybe in a specific space, and then you're connecting with someone who's in that same space, who knows another person, who knows another person. So it's very important, and particularly sitting in on meetings or even volunteering sometimes, as a practicing anthropologist, you might do some volunteering with organizations, and that might be your networking opportunity, where you're volunteering your services in a community setting, and then that organization is connected with another organization who's needing someone to help guide a particular project, or be a project director or consult in this one, and they may be paying this time. So that those are those networks where you're part of one organization or working with one, but you're on the scene when in talks of another. So it's very, very important to just simply also just show up to places.
Great, that's great advice. Before we talk about some of the past positions folks have held, we have a great question in the chat that I want to read from Dr. Mika Polanco. I also like to thank her for being part of the ABA and helping to organize a lot of these online events. And she writes, as an anthropologist working in the policy world, I find that there's a lot of translation happening between how we talk about issues in the discipline and how policymakers talk about similar issues. I'm sure this is true for anthropologists in other areas as well. It would be great to hear about some of your challenges and successes in bringing an anthropological perspective into the projects you work on. Why don't we start with Dr. Washington Cherry, if you could respond to that, about hearing some of your challenges and successes in bringing an anthropological perspective into the projects you work on.
I think right off, some of the challenges initially in going in the spaces where folks weren't really familiar with anthropology, trying to show there's value in actually speaking to people, that it's not all about surveys, that there's value in taking time trying to problem solve. You can't just get the answer, in a day. And I think that's probably been the biggest challenge. If people are more comfortable with other data sources, trying to convince folks that you have to put the time in to building relationships and allowing people to be a part of the process. And I think for me, at least in my experiences, that has been the most difficult. In spaces where they're familiar with anthropology and anthropologists, or even if someone took a class, there seems to be a little more trust. But I think that I've spent time in my career trying to build that trust, like this is a legitimate field where we're able to produce important research, and we're able to really produce important ideas about things that can change people's lives. And so, yeah, that's what I'll leave you with.
All right. Dr. Adams, could you talk a little bit about that, about the difference or some of the challenges and successes in bringing an anthropological perspective into the projects you work on?
You know, I think when you're trained in a traditional anthropology program, you know, you start to learn how to, you know, spout Gilroy or Bakhtin or these various theorists. And when you're in an applied setting, it's not so easy to drop those names and have everybody recognize them or even the kind of concepts they're talking about. So you have to figure out new ways to repackage those concepts and make them a little bit more, I mean, for lack of a better word, lowbrow, because sometimes even sophisticated theoretical concepts can throw people off and make people shut down. So you have to figure out ways to think through the sort of great things that you learned, but to make them turn them into everyday language. And then at the same time, some of the translation I've had to do is more about using the skill set of entering into new communities, building bridges, understanding how to listen, and introducing other people to that. So taking, for example, for a number of years when I was at the NEA Foundation, I would take students or educators from across the country overseas. So you're taking them on this 10-day trip overseas to a place they've never been. And you have to show them how to sort of enter into this new community, how to move through that initial shock, and how to sort of really be attuned to finding those small differences. So there's all kinds of ways in which, you know, you're constantly translating what we learned and how we were trained into usable skill sets to help other people gain greater insights and understanding. And that's the fun part of the work.
That's great. Dr. Winn, what are some, we'd like to hear some of your challenges and successes in bringing an anthropological perspective into the projects you work on. This is a question that we asked everybody else.
I would say one of the challenges, you know, that is people trying to understand what you do. You know, I'm in a community, mostly in my hometown. So I always say people remember how you left, not who you come back to be. You know, I left when I was 17. And so people remember me that. And so that well, quote unquote, native anthropology, as they call it, is another factor for me. But also, you know, understanding what anthropologists is and what anthropologists do is one of the first challenges. And then the language and how you interpret things. I'm currently working as a consultant with the city of West Palm Beach. So I'm consulting with city government. And so city government has a completely different language. They have a completely different idea of what success is. And they have a completely different timeline versus what an anthropologist timeline would be and understanding the community. And so, for example, they're redeveloping a historically African-American community. And so there are certain things you have to consider when you should be developing a particular neighborhood and the fears that come along with redevelopment. And so my biggest challenge is one, helping you know, city government understand the importance of the particular neighborhood's culture, the history that is associated with, and the time it takes to build relationships to understand the neighborhood in which you're redeveloping in. So that has been the biggest challenge for me as far as the communication and the type of language is used and how people define success, you know, in my profession and what is considered, you know, looking at the humanity of people and, you know, versus government, you know, success is completing a building, you know, so that's just one example of the challenges. And one, knowing who I am and what I do, but two, how we work on different time frames and different levels, and then how we view a community is very different in that way.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I was just thinking about like you talking about like success being like completing a building because of the position or one of the positions that you have. And I was just thinking like within academia, it's like writing a paper or like getting published, and how challenging that could be from that perspective. Dr. Codrington, could you talk to us a little bit about like some of your challenges and successes in bringing an anthropological perspective into the projects you work on?
That's an interesting question. I think the idea around defining deliverables, and I think people have referred to this, other panelists have referred to this as kind of what determines success or how success is measured. That's been a big, in non-academic jobs, I've found, in my experience, I've found that there's a quicker timeline, more needs to be delivered faster. They really don't have a lot of time for jargon. So language is key, being efficient with what you say and how you say it. And the question around making that accessible, I think is really big. I don't always lead. I don't always lead with anthropology. I think of myself in that way. I sort of turn into problem solver, and the skills kind of they come in by default. But I don't do a checklist. If I'm using this skill, I'm going to communicate it this way. So I have to be able to read situations and then be able to manage expectations, deliver on a particular time frame. But then there has to be some integrity and some sort of way that you've maintained your own sort of professional identity in all of this. So I think questions around getting others to understand the importance of context, relationships and notions of community, and how you come in and don't necessarily parachute in, extract information. So there's also really big questions around value. So, the values of me as a professional, the values of my colleagues and organizations or people that I work with have to be aligned, or I won't do the work. So I think there's a number of things, anthropologists, a number of questions that just, as an anthropologist, you ask, or some tend to ask when they enter professional relationships or positions that don't always match up with non-academic understandings of work and deliverables. So I think there's an issue around accessibility, the building and defining of successful relationships, deliverables, and context that have been sometimes a bit of a rub, or there's been a bit of a disconnect when working with in applied settings.
That's great. I want to stay with you, Dr. Codrington. So if you could talk a little bit to the audience about describing your current position, like what you do on a day-to-day basis, and a little bit about like, how you think like your anthropological training comes into play in the workplace. I think you discussed a little bit of that in your previous response, but we'd love to hear some more.
Sure. So my current position, I'm the executive director of an arts organization based in East Harlem. We're in a mixed-use building, so there are 90 apartments. They're all artists. There's a theater, visual art space, and our offices are there. Our work revolves around theater, performance, and visual art. So we do a lot of work around supporting artists as they develop their work and presenting visual art exhibits, full productions of theater work. So it's a varied sort of performance theater and visual art mix that we have, and our work supports artists of color, BIPOC artists, and really artists that are dealing with social justice themes, socially relevant themes to communities of color in their work. Excuse me. So the day-to-day, there's like everybody else, there's pre-COVID, COVID, and what we think maybe whatever the future is. But a lot of my work deals with people management, fundraising, just getting money, keeping the doors open, because we are arts nonprofit. So spend a lot of time talking to funders and again translating what we do to different types of funders and different types of audiences. We have a relatively small staff. There's 7 of us. So in any given day, I'm talking to my development, my fundraiser, my marketer, my curator, or our curator. So it's a range, but it's basically arts management, arts administration. I think my training has really allowed me to be comfortable being a generalist and being comfortable in those situations, talking to these different audiences and different types of staff members, community members. And, so I don't say in another world and in another time, but my research really is based around hip hop and globalization. So throughout all of the positions that I've had, I've really attempted to maintain my work and connection to hip hop and hip hop culture. So our organization, aesthetically and from a content perspective, does a lot of hip hop based programming, whether that be plays, whether that be visual art exhibits. So, I'm lucky enough to be able to apply both my research interests, my applied training, as well as management skills to this position. And I don't think without anthropological training, without training in anthropology, I don't think I would be as comfortable in this position as I am. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Dr. Winn, can you talk or describe your current position or positions, what you do on a day-to-day basis and how your anthropological training comes into play in the workplace?
Okay, so currently, I have my own business, Consider the Culture, and so I'm a consultant to on a few projects right now. And so the main one is with the city of West Palm Beach CRA. And so with that, and as I mentioned, I am a consultant with the actual CRA in their decision making as they are redeveloping the neighborhood. They purchased the historic Sunset Lounge, which is historic jazz lounge that was built in the 1920s, and they're restoring it right now. And that is probably one of the only major largest historic building that's left in the historic African American community. And so part of my job when I originally was hired for this was 4 years ago to conduct community engagement work, to get input from the community about what they would like to see as far as programming in the historic Sunset Lounge, as well as the surrounding areas, but also get an understanding of the community. I actually live in the community, so I'm immersed in the neighborhood. So part of my role is also to get the perspective from the residents and establish, making sure that residents are at the table in the decision-making process. I found in my day-to-day, I'm constantly connecting with residents and informing them about what's going on in the city, what's going on in the CRA, and how their voice can be heard. And so that's part of what I do. And then my day-to-day is I usually have staff meetings with the CRA. I usually have meetings with some of the city departments, sometimes with sanitation, sometimes with code enforcement, because all of those play a role in impacting the neighborhood. And so in the middle of redevelopment, I'm in the neighborhood who may not have street signs. So you got a $20 million building that's being redeveloped, but at the same time, right up the street or even on my block, there's no street sign. So I'm working to make sure also that aspect is, as you're making a pretty building, but you're also addressing the basic needs of the actual residents, including myself, who live in the neighborhood. So that's what I kind of do day to day, just a general a general thing of what I do day to day. And then my other current position is I'm the project director of the African American Oral History Project. It's one of the first projects, a virtual project that I'm directing. We had originally supposed to interview elders. Young people were supposed to interview elders face to face, but due to COVID, we had to be very innovative and have this done, oral history project done virtually. And so that has been, that's a whole nother story of getting elders over the age of 75 to be on Zoom and to be interviewed by teenagers. And so that's what I do. I do that twice a week with my young people and training them training them about their history, the local history of those elders that they're interviewing, but then also helping them prepare of how they tell their stories in a presentation that we'll be doing actually next month. So those are the two main projects that I'm working on right now.
All right, thank you. Dr. Adams, could you talk a little bit about your current position, what you do on a day-to-day basis, and how your anthropological training comes into play?
Yeah, so I'm a senior consultant at a consulting firm that was founded by two anthropologists. So we use an anthropological frame to explore issues of organizational change, leadership development, and DEI. And so, like just today, for example, before I got on this call, I finished a business proposal that went into a major paper manufacturer to look at how to integrate the culture of a particular paper plant into their larger culture, the larger organization that's a multi-billion-dollar paper company. Um, Last night I was on the phone on a Zoom call leading a leadership group at a international cosmetic company located in London and Australia through a leadership development um, sort of meeting around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's like various things I do every day. It depends on the client. And I started off on Sunday with a call to Australia, and where it was Monday morning there, talking to a lawyer who wanted to put out a privacy notice across all their territories, but was using a European model and had asked me to do some background research on how these different, how this European legal model could be translated across the spectrum in all their markets. And so I spent about 25 hours researching the sort of data privacy laws, employment laws, and cultural context to figure out how this thing would play itself out, and then produce a report for her. So it's a matter of researching, training people, and doing business development to bring in new clients. That's my day-to-day activities.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Washington Cherry, can you describe your current position or positions, what you do on a day-to-day basis, and how your anthropological training comes into play?
Sure. So I am wearing a couple of hats right now. I am finishing up the semester at American University as full-time faculty, and I have recently transitioned as the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at a company called Maximus. It's a publicly traded global company with about 40,000 employees. I am also kind of lessening up my consulting engagements, but prior to that, I've had a consulting business with a number of different contracts. And what I would say is, in every role that I have had and currently have, I am sort of in teacher mode. I'm a teacher at heart. I am staying true to my commitment to anti-racism and racial equity and social justice issues. And so it's interesting, I continue to have my hand in all of these different areas, but I have tunnel vision when it comes to those things. And I've kind of made a commitment to myself to only do work that supports that. My day-to-day is having difficult conversations with folks, whether I'm teaching a racism course at American or a linguistics course there, or convincing people that DE&I is important. It's important for the work environment as well as the communities we serve and touch. I have been on calls all day training colleagues on how to be facilitators of difficult conversations and to have listening sessions, and employing some of my anthropological training in that, how to hear people, how to read body language, and how to also situate what we're talking about now into a larger historical context. And I feel like I'm able to do that in just about everything that I've done. Some of the other things, the consulting roles, I've done research, assessment, evaluation, coaching, creating curriculum and other learning modules. And probably one of the most important consulting experiences I've had has been with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. They're the folks started by UPS. It's the philanthropic arm. And I got the opportunity to do a lot of learning, sitting in meetings, seeing how decisions are made, seeing how decisions should be made, vetting different tools and trainings and bringing it back to the foundation, building what I developed as equity coaches across the foundation, across their direct services arm. And so I was able to really use the training I got as an anthropologist and also the training I didn't get, the things that just being connected to communities, growing up with parents who are very connected in the communities, who are activists in their own right, trying to find a way to merge those worlds to really push for change. And so let me stop talking. I feel like I'm just running my mouth, but it's really, I get excited about all of the possibilities we have when we're able to do this work, and when we're able to work together and share experiences like this.
It's wonderful. You know, you're not running your mouth. I appreciate everything that you're saying, as well as everyone else. I want to go ahead and take a question that was from the chat, because I think it's appropriate. This is from Dr. Kalfani Toure. He writes, I recently started a nonprofit center with an applied focus. I realized that my training as a traditional academic doesn't translate well in the technical areas of an applied anthropologist. So for example, I had to learn how to apply for an LLC to protect my interests, things of that nature. I realized that as an activist scholar, I need to be in communication with many professionals, government, and community organizations beyond the academy as an applied scholar. Can the panelists speak to the special skills necessary to function as an applied scholar, or stated differently, what skills should pure or / traditional anthropologists should acquire if they wish to have successful careers in the applied world? And since we're with, can Dr. Washington Cherry, can you address that, please? And then we'll go around the table.
Sure, I'll do my best. So, you know, I think part of the skills are just the skill of being able to communicate with people across differences and to really listen. I think that's probably something that's important to do. In terms of the technical things like applying for an LLC and just trying to pair, how do I get to how do I get to learn this sector that maybe I don't have that much experience in, whether it's government or whether it's philanthropy or museum studies. And I think it's about connecting with people on an individual level, about trying to see, are there volunteer opportunities or any way to insert yourself in some of the conversations you might not typically be in. And then that networking piece is really important. And I'm all about, I ask people when I don't know. I ask people for guidance. I ask questions, and I'll be the first to admit this is a shortcut, not even a shortcoming. This is just something I don't know. Can you bring me up to speed? I realize sessions like this are so valuable because I probably will be trying to link in with everybody on here once we get off. But again, Kalfani, I think, one, don't try to do everything all at once, but just think about what would serve you the best. What is it that you really need to know? And then how can you pair that with what you already do really well and what you already know?
Great. Dr. Winn, could you address Dr. Toure's question about the special skills necessary to function as an applied scholar, or stated differently, what skills should pure / traditional anthropologists should acquire if they wish to have successful careers in the applied world?
Okay, I think, just to add on to, to you have to have the ability to speak to different, if you are, academic language in which you talk, and academics is a culture, or academia is a culture in itself. And then outside that world is everybody else, so you have to have the ability to, navigate and as well as be able to speak to different audiences, whether it's in city government or businesses in a community, or, nonprofit organizations, sororities, fraternities, depending on who you are addressing, or environmental organization. You have to be able to speak to those influences, which is, I think that, anthropologists in general would know how to do in a sense, but not come in necessarily, as this scholar, because they, broader audiences, identify scholarship, from my experience, with a university. So, just understanding how they may view you, but so speak in their language in order to understand them, but then also the ability to really look at something as, you know, this is you're as a consultant, especially the business part. You mentioned LLC. So, you know, for me, you know, I started connecting myself too with those who are business owners, people who own their own businesses, and really connecting with them of how they establish their own business. What do I need to do to, you know, patent my name, or as far as my logos and things like that. And so connecting myself in the sense of a larger world than the academic world. And so, and that takes time. It takes time, and you may not fully get out of the academic world, but the ability to be able to navigate through and adjust very quickly, depending on who you're connecting to, who you're talking with. You know, there are times where when people say, you know, what did you do? I say, oh, well, you know, I help solve problems, or I talk to people about different cultures. I help people understand different cultures, versus saying, well, I'm an anthropologist, you know, but you know, people understand like, oh, I talk about different cultures, or I'm helping solving the problem to make sure that more people get in houses, instead of speaking on a more policy level. So it just depends on who you're around, and that's who you communicate and just yourself to. I think that's a big thing that has helped me to be able to kind of cut back on the academic part and really learn and listen, watch, observe, and see how people are talking and moving and shaking, and adjust to that, and do it very quickly if you can, you know.
Okay, that's great. Dr. Codrington, can you talk to Dr. Touré's question about, you know, some of these skills that are necessary to function as an applied scholar, or you know, what types of skills people should acquire if they wish to have these successful careers in the applied world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are skills that you need that are specific to being an anthropologist and translating that, and there's just sort of professional background, or if you call them best practices or what have you. I think the ability to read the room is very important. And know who you're communicating with and what you need to communicate and how. Obviously, content expertise in whatever area of applied you're going into. So that I always feel like it's on my research skills. I mean, I constantly are engaging those in whatever job I've had, and going deep and knowing so the area as well as the people that I'm dealing with, whether it be organizations or individuals. It's always helpful. I think there's also, I mean, a soft skill around too is not, I think it was said earlier, not feeling like you have to do everything or know every single thing despite having done the research. There's just some things that you're not going to know, whether that be the technicalities of, you know, getting an LLC together. So, you know, the ability or the willingness to sort of assemble your own team of folks, whether that be formal or informal advisors, or whether those are mentors or some people that can advise you around what you might need if it's an LLC, an accountant, or legal, or how to get a hold of that. So there's some just very technical functions of being in the applied world that I think are applicable sometimes to this question. But I think what's been said earlier around, you know, the need to be able to translate what you do, be able to, I think, lean in and lean out of leading with anthropology, because it's not always going to open the door in the way you may think it might. So you have to be comfortable with that. And that's not a value judgment. That's just an assessment of the situation and how you need to move through these different dynamics with, you know, community members, potential partners, whether they be business or otherwise. So I think, you know, if folks can have be pretty real and a pretty good skill assessment of where they are, and then what they figure out a goal and what skills they need to move into that new position or get that new job or to get more applied work. I think a healthy dose of self-assessment is good as well.
All right, thank you. Dr. Adams, can you respond to this question about the special skills necessary to function as an applied scholar, or
yeah,
what types of
I
skills?
think there's some real general skills. Like I really feel like the financial skills are really important, and those are not something that you generally learn in a PhD program. But also just the whole idea of continuous training. I think I've been in 4 leadership and managerial programs since I left my postdoc, just because I'm always looking for opportunities to grow and for other people to sort of help me see the world in a different way. And then also just your networks. Your networks are very important for helping you to both figure out where your gaps are at and help you when you have those gaps, as well as to help you bring out your strengths. And you know, the big thing about networks is develop them before you need them. You know, you can't have a need or a problem and try to develop a network at the same time. It looks too transactional. So try to figure out the kind of folks that you need in your network to support you across time and develop those relationships and build the trust so that when you do need to depend upon that network, it's there for you and it's dedicated to helping you at a moment's notice.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much. I want to continue. I just want to take another question from the chat because I think they're flowing pretty well with everything. This one comes from Dr. Lee Baker, and he writes, oh, you know what? Before I get to Lee's question, let me not skip over the question that was before that. This comes from Dr. Ann Galvin at St. John's University. She was wondering if any the panelists had thoughts about what makes for a good applied anthropology program in 2020. She's trying to think through how an MA can be developed in an ethical way to support students into meaningful employment. Are there essential skills that they should be learning? Also, how can faculty best guide students in presenting what they have to offer as anthropology graduates to employers? Dr. Adams, would you mind going first on that one?
You know, I think that really, exposing students to, like, helping students see what anthropology can be both as the academic study and as an applied study, opening doors for students and young people to have a variety of experiences. And then also to, I think, push ourselves beyond this idea that most people are going to end up in the classroom, understanding that some people are going to be in the classroom and some people won't be in the classroom, so that you design curriculum that offers them a fuller range of opportunities. And sometimes in programs that are very academic, there's not a lot of experience among the faculty on being non-academic. So I think those kind of faculties have to kind of decide, or at least members have to take a proactive stance in connecting up their students with people beyond that particular faculty. So if you have friends that are in other departments that are more applied, or you have practitioners that you know, making sure you bring those people into your classroom to speak and building up relationships in those ways. I think that, and then just, I think anthropology has become so much more recognized as a really tangible skill to have for this new world that we live in now, this global world. And so there's a lot more resources to help connect students to it. And so we should make a better effort to make sure that we connect up with those resources and share those resources so people can have a sense of make the choices as opposed to just sort of fall into applied anthropology for those who went to more academically oriented programs.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comments. Dr. Codrington, can you address this as well? Like, thinking through how an MA can be developed in an ethical way to support students into meaningful employment, essential skills that they should be learning, and also how faculty can best guide students in presenting what they have to offer as anthropology graduates and employers.
I'll echo what Dr. Adams talked about in terms of exposure. I think exposure to the breadth of what you can do with an anthropology degree, but also specifically linking students with different types of organizations across sectors. And I think presenting anthropology or applied anthropology as a viable career option or the range of options that you can have versus this is something I'm doing by default because I can't find a job in an academic setting or getting downsized or outsourced. You know, I think that's a very, it sounds like a very general thing, but it's a very specific thing because it involves developing relationships with different organizations and different sectors in which students can be sort of transitioned to or exposed to or work with as part of their training. And I think it goes back to this idea about relationship building that we've been talking about throughout the panel, is that I think these departments should have different types of relationships with, whether they be communities or specific kinds of organizations. I mean, that's something that I think helped to me as throughout my career, is being able to move between different types of communities. And it would have been great if I would have had some of that training. I mean, I've taught classes on that and thought, wow, it would have been great if I would have had this type of class when I was a student. But I'm not sure how widespread they are in applied programs or how they're actually executed. So I think the overall exposure to different types of career paths, but also having the tangible relationships and opportunities to work with different organizations and different sectors as students seems viable. I mean, yeah, I love it when anthropologists apply for positions that we have, because they're a specific kind of student and they have a specific kind of training. So, you know, I'd love to see more of the anthropologists sort of getting outside of the sort of academic umbrella.
All right, thank you. Dr. Washington Cherry, what do you have to say with regards to how like an MA program can be developed in an ethical way to support students into meaningful employment, and also other skills that they should be learning, and how can faculty best guide students in presenting what they have to offer as anthropology graduates to employers?
Yeah, I agree with everything else that's been said. I don't have much to add except that I think there needs to be more real life experiences and more type of, course application, even if it's something brief, to at least give them that exposure or a different way of thinking. What I'm seeing in some of my own classes, especially with my graduate students, is there's this false sense of security of like, I have this book knowledge, but then when they go out to engage with people or they're working on research proposals, there's a huge disconnect because they don't have, or they haven't had many opportunities to engage the application piece or to actually engage with people, even though they're studying people. And so I would just offer up that, in the courses and the advising and the helping students get internships or to think about career paths, that we have to provide more exposure and more real life opportunities.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Winn, what could you say with regards to issues regarding, applied MA programs in anthropology, essential skills, and some of the types of things that faculty could best guide students in presenting what they have to offer as anthropology graduates to employers?
I think the best thing, and coming from an applied program, that what I think would have even added to, because we did have ethics class. We had community engaged projects in the program. We were part of projects with that interdisciplinary projects. That's very important, where you're partnering up with individuals from the Africana studies, from public health, from engineering. So something interdisciplinary and being exposed to those things. But most of all, to add to that, in which many have said, as far as advising students of how the search process in doing it, because you tend to see like the process of applying for maybe in a tenure track position or a postdoc, but as far as the process in searching for or preparation for in that search of a non-academic job would be very helpful in that. And what does that look like? Where do I start? What are my options even in a non-academic setting? How do I get my foot in the door, or how do I present and show my skill set to a broader audience that may not know what anthropology is? That type of training or advising and how to do that in utilizing your skills, but how do you for that into like, you know, an everyday person to understand what you do. Like that is something that, you know, would be helpful to students, and how do they change from academics to non-academics as well. That's something that I think will be helpful to students. And it would be, even though coming out of an applied program, you know, you still have this thing where I still need to apply for a tenure track position. So, you know, even though you probably want to do something else. So even just having people set in place, or faculty set in place, saying it's okay to go non-academic. It's, you know, you don't have to go tenure track. You don't have to go postdoc. You can go a completely different direction and be just as successful and just as valuable too. So you need people to assure graduate students or students that it's okay to do that as well. It's not weird. It's not strange. It's not going to kill your career. It is actually a lot of people out here doing that kind of work.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to move on to the another question that we had in the chat. And this is from Dr. Lou Baker. He writes, I'm so impressed by the entrepreneurial mindset of each of the panelists. It takes courage to take risks and identifying opportunities. Can you speak to how you muster this courage to take risks? Can we stay with you, Dr. Winn,
Sure.
to respond to that?
That's so fitting, because that's my life. That's my story, because I was one of those individuals that was on a tenure track position. And 4 years into my tenure track, 2 more years to getting promoted to associate professor, I decided to leave my tenure track. And it's so interesting because I came from an applied program, but yet I felt that, you know, that societal idea that you're supposed to be successful if you do this, or you have a tenure track position, that's equals success. But for me, you know, 4 years into my tenure track, for me, and I'm specifically saying for me, because what may be good for you may be something different for someone else. But I decided that I wanted to really go into what I went to school for, which is applied anthropology, and really immerse myself in communities and use my skill set to a broader audience. And I could not do that where I was. So I decided to walk away, which takes a lot. I got a lot for it. A lot of people looked at me sideways because that was not a popular thing to do. But inside of me, I felt the need to do that, and I felt at peace with doing that, despite the weirdness of it. But once I got out of that, I knew that I could utilize my skill set in the way that I wanted to do it, how I wanted to do it, and when I wanted to do it. And I had more control of how I wanted to be recognized, and the work that I wanted to do on the ground level. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but you know, it's, you know, that's something that it at that moment in the time, and that was 6 years ago, it was a very hard decision. It was a very challenging decision, but it was the very best decision for me to do. And I'm still teaching. I'm teaching at Palm Beach Atlantic University. I'm teaching 2 courses right now, and I'm infusing my anthropology community engaged research even with my students. And so I think that is something that I think all students who are, you know, thinking about a different path, I think that those are conversations that students should feel comfortable in talking about, and it's okay to shift to a different path and use your skill set in a different way, in a different setting that will be impactful, not just to communities, but for yourself.
Thank you so much, especially, you know, being so, you know, candid about, like, you know, kind of like the fear that might be involved in like moving out of it. I was just listening to you and I was just thinking to myself, well, would I leave like my tenured position at the institution I'm at, where I know I get my check, I get my little health benefits and everything like that. But I want to hear from others. But go ahead.
No, I just said it's not easy, but you know.
Right. So Dr. Washington Cherry, can you speak to how you mustered the courage to take these different risks?
I've been sitting here thinking about how to best answer that question. As I mentioned before, I think part of it for me, I started doing the consulting early because I was hungry. I was broke. I was in the DC area trying to live off this stipend that was like, I think my stipend was like $13,000 a year. And I was like, I never want to be in a position uh, where I am worried about, paying bills and worried about, having options for, just making decisions for myself. And so that kind of pushed me to, you better figure this out. And I'm glad I kind of developed that mindset, especially now that we're here in COVID, where so many people, are either very tied to maybe a job they hate, or maybe they've lost their jobs and they're like, what else can I do? And I never wanted to feel like that. I wanted to have a level of autonomy. I wanted to have the space to reinvent myself, at the same time, do this important work. As I mentioned, I've been faculty at AU for a number of years now. I was not tenure track. It was made very clear to me. I made different decisions in my career path. I did a scholar in residence. I did a postdoc. I had kids. I was doing consulting, and it was made very clear to me that perhaps some of my decisions and experiences were not valued to be on this tenure track journey. But we will, continue to use you as a workhorse and teach the largest classes and all of this. And so, I mean, that's real. The university is still an institution, and as someone who is well versed on structural and institutional racism, it's very clear to me how one can navigate and what the limitations are. And so that also has guided a lot of my decisions. So I'll leave you with that. I think that it's not just courage, it's also being true to what's important, kind of assessing where you are, what your work-life balance is like, where you want to be, what offers you the best thing for your personal and individual financial family situation. And so I would advise anyone to make decisions like that. I'm more of a both and person instead of an either or. And so I try to make sure I'm in those spaces where it can be both and. There are many times I have juggled a lot in my career. When you're your own boss too, you might not have the 9 to 5, but you might be up at 3, 4 in the morning for, a month straight getting work done. And so I think it's about what do you do that's fulfilling, but also that you can look yourself in the mirror and feel proud about, and feel like, you're making a difference, but you're being true to yourself. And life is short. So I'll just say that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Codrington, can you speak to how to muster the courage to take these risks? And also, could you also add, because Dr. Washington Cherry and Dr. Winn also mentioned how, they had, or they were, Alicia was in a, on a tenure track, had a tenure track position, and Arvenita also was in a teaching position, an exploitative teaching position. Did you also have any tenure track positions or offers or anything along the way, or in addition to the mustering the courage to take risk?
Yeah, I had all of that stuff. No, I'm joking. I mean, I did have a tenure track offer, and I turned it down. And I think some people are still to this day like, why'd you do that? I guess why'd you do it, but how'd you do it? I guess when you know, I didn't feel like that was me. Right. And it would have been great, let somebody who really wants that job have that job. Yeah. It wasn't going to work for me. And I knew, and I became comfortable with the decision, and I haven't looked back. I think it does become a question around what kind of life do you want? I think it was mentioned earlier, the work-life balance, where your values, what kind of environment do you want what kind of colleagues do you want? And not to say this is not a critique of academia, the academy.
Yes, it is.
No. It's more of an observation. from my perspective.
I'm just kidding.
But yeah, I mean, I think when you know, and so it becomes less courage and something that you feel comfortable doing. And this is, you choose your path and you go with it. You know, yeah, I mean, I pretty much knew during my postdoc, when I was in the museum, kind of outside of a university classic university setting, that I probably wouldn't go back to the academy because it was just kind of, there was just a different kind of work environment and way to express my academic interest and research interest and community engagement interest that I felt didn't really exist for me in other places. So I didn't put myself in a position where I didn't think I'd thrive. So.
Thank you. And Dr. Adams, can you speak to how you mustered this courage to take risk? And also, did you come from a tenure track position, or were you teaching in the academy or something, or working in the academy before that?
At one point I had a tenure track position at DePaul University in Chicago, and then was offered a new position at a foundation in Michigan with a significant pay increase and an ability to do a lot more of what I wanted to do. And at the same time, because it was a retreat center, teach in small settings. So that was a real good move for me. But I would also say that even Lee asked that question, and really accepting challenges, you grow through challenges. And Lee offered me the challenge of like serving on the Transforming Anthropology. That sort of was a really big opportunity for me to like stretch in new areas. And that's how you build the muscles for taking those leaps of faith, but also being willing to sort of like fail, to get into stuff and it not work out, but that there's a lesson there and there's a wisdom that gets developed through all of that. And so I think it's been that combination of both challenging myself to build up new muscles, but also to reflect back on where I've been and the places I've been and some of the places that weren't really great fits, and then figuring out like what's the lesson there. Because I was once on a learning trip in Canada at a school, and this 9-year-old girl, her experiment failed, and somebody started taunting her across the room, and she said, "It's not a failure if you learn something from it." So I've tried to turn my professional life, into a learning journey. And I think that's really served me well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have another question in the chat from Dr. Kamala Hayward-Rotimi. She writes, "It is increasingly clear to me that applied anthropological approaches and tools can be useful to many different fields and industries. Dr. Adams mentioned how important it is to relate how anthropology can work outside of traditional academic spaces. Can the panelists share some ways they communicate and convince others of how anthropology can generate action in their applied projects?" Dr. Adams, since you were mentioned.
That's a great question. Like for me, sometimes it can really create bridges. It can build bridges between partners that you're working with. So once I was working with Jamie Dimon at Chase Manhattan Bank, his office, and I was at the King Center, and they asked us to come and speak for Martin Luther King's holiday. It was Black History Month, sorry. And what I did was, using my research skills, I looked at the century-long relationship between the Rockefeller family and the King family, and to try to show them how there's this 6 degrees of separation. So that, and basically, I went and presented to their executive team this research that I had developed, and they had no real sense that this history existed. Yes, they knew Rockefeller was instrumental in Spelman, things like that, but they didn't really understand the impact of how it would create that environment created an MLK. So, just doing things like that really went over well and built a lot of trust. So figuring out things like that, as well as I think trying to figure out things that people get stuck on. People get stuck on, for example, racism. They have a hard time figuring what that stuff really means. So we have a lot of great understandings that will help them to sort of work through that so that they don't sort of like stay in their place of ignorance, I would say, and intolerance, but they figure out ways to step out and to be open and to move forward with being more accepting and taking more chances around those kinds of issues.
Thank you. Dr. Washington Cherry, can you talk a little bit about how you communicate and convince others about how anthropology can generate action in your applied projects?
I don't have much to add except that I just try to educate on what anthropology is on the most basic level. We study people and culture, and we have the unique ability, if you've been trained in that, if you've been really trained in looking at differences and commonalities and how to bring people together. I try to go into teaching mode and invite people to be a part of that with me. And I think generally, the folks I've worked with have been really interested in having those conversations and in learning the skills to do that, to do their work better. And they've been open. And I think when you can get anyone to talk about something personal they've experienced, things they care about, how they read people, where their shortcomings are, et cetera, I think it invites a more productive conversation about how this anthropology thing works. And so that approach has served me very well.
Thank you. Dr. Codrington, could you address this as well? You know, how you communicate and convince others of how Anthro can generate action in like the different applied projects you've been a part of?
Would you mind coming back to me? I have a kid-related issue I have to deal with really quickly.
Oh, sure. No worries.
Thank you.
I know, with the age of COVID. That's fine. Dr. Winn, you're up next. How are some of the ways that you communicate and convince others of how anthropology can generate action in their applied projects? Can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. It's how, it's things you kind of that you do every day, you don't think about it anymore like that. But I think that the way that I do it is kind of, I try not to use like anthropological words when I speak. And one of the main things I kind of do is really use our anthropological methods with observation, participant observation, and then how looking or kind of translating that to decision makers and say, from my observation, you really need to pay attention to their nonverbal communication, because in this meeting, in this community meeting, for example, they've tuned you out. and those who are like trying to relay a particular topic, the residents may not want to hear what they have to say. And so the cultural and historical part of that, I push that and say, what I think is happening is, historically, this neighborhood has been neglected for over and over again for 20 years. And now all of a sudden they're redeveloping it. So they don't trust you, So I'll use throw a couple of things out what I think is happening, or maybe we need to consider this, and I'm using, ethnographic research to understand what's happening in a room. And then when we have a follow-up meeting, I give my thoughts about that. And so I'm incorporating using certain methods, and then my findings from those methods, and then transferring that to that information to that particular group of people who I'm working with, and push the importance of considering people's culture and their history. And so that's kind of the way that I have really push using, anthropology in someone mentioned these small ways, and just throwing a couple things out there and getting people to see a different perspective, which is a holistic perspective, looking at something more holistic than just this one way of viewing it, but as anthropology, looking at this in all these different angles, but you throw it out in bits and pieces for them to look at something holistically and slowly, not too much.
That's right. You don't want to overwhelm them. Exactly.
No.
So I want to respect people's time. You know, we've come to 3:30, but at the same time, I have one more question that I have here that I would really like people to answer. If you need to leave, that's fine. But if you could stay on a little bit longer, that'd be awesome. Just to answer this last question. And that question. Go ahead, Arvenita.
I think someone needs to mute. There seems to be a lot of feedback.
Okay. Does this help? Is that better? Okay. I can't hear you. Let me try this. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I think the feedback is gone now.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, folks. Sorry. My apologies. So, can you all hear me okay right now, or is it just feedback?
I think Aisha needs to mute.
Okay. Okay, I muted Alicia. Did that work? Okay. Thank you, Lee. Lee's been saving the day for years. Thank you so much. Just one last question. This is from a doctoral student at the University of Kentucky, Ruth Dyke. This has been phenomenal. Thank you all so much. I would love to hear more about how you juggle differing notions of value. How do you stay true to social justice or anti-racist values? What do you do if the entity hiring you doesn't care about what the community wants or values? When you do decide to reject the client's proposal or try to change their values? Oh, I'm sorry. When do you decide to reject the client's proposal or try to change their values? So how do you stay true to social justice and or anti-racist values? Dr. Codrington, can we go to you?
Yes, thank you for your patience. How do we? Well, you know, part of the reason I do the work that I do and work in the way that I do is that I have more control over who I work with. So generally, if our values aren't aligned, then we don't work with organizations or partners. It becomes a little more complicated when you're talking about funding and philanthropy, because it's a driver in a lot of ways of the work. But you know, we have internally as an organization, we have discussions around values of the organization and how we want to work and who we want to work with, sort of internal colleagues and staff. And you know, we just had a partnership, and we did a debrief and sort of decided that, you know, next time around we're not going to work with this group because after working with them, we weren't quite aligned, and we didn't know that until we actually did the project. But so yeah, I mean, I think it's having a pretty clear moral compass around social justice, equity already, or having that operating as an operating principle of your work. And it tends to select out those, for me at least, for those who I want to work with, I will work with, and who I will and won't. So yeah, I mean, I think pretty defined idea about those values to begin with, and then applying that in your partnerships or your business relationships for us, for me.
All right. And how about you, Dr. Washington Cherry? I mean, how about this issue of, like, you know, how do you stay true to your social justice or anti-racist values? And what do you do if the entity you're hiring you doesn't care about what the community wants or values? And when do you decide to reject a client's proposal or try to change their values?
Yeah, that's a really interesting and important question. I think early on in my career, I took a lot of work that might not have been aligned with everything I'm interested in or believed. And I think that it's one, developing kind of the patience to help bring people on a journey where they just don't have the language or they don't have the experience with where you are with social justice issues or racial equity, but they can get there. So I think that's one thing. I think that oftentimes people are like, you know, hurry up and go nowhere, and they don't want to be uncomfortable, and they don't necessarily want to or have time to learn. So they're saying this is important to them, but their actions are saying otherwise. And I think it's a similar thing, having a conversation with them about what is it that you really want. Now that I'm a little older and wiser, I always lead with what's important to me, so people are clear on where I stand. And I tell everyone I make no apologies for working toward racial equity and doing anti-racism work. And this is who I am. And so then it's kind of like they have to decide if they want to deal with me or not. But that took some time to get comfortable with being that bold, to be able to just say that, to frame that on the front end. So when things come up, you can remind folks, this is what you asked for. This is, you know, you're getting exactly what I told you were going to get. So try to just figure out what's most important to you, how that aligns with your bills and responsibilities, and then go from there.
That's sound advice. Alicia, how do you stay true to your social justice and anti-racist values? And what do you do if the entity hiring you doesn't care about what the community wants or values? And when you decide to reject the client's proposal or try to change their values?
So that what someone mentioned about, you know, sometimes you don't know, you know, you think that you all are on the same page until down the line you realize, okay, they're interested in this, and this is what I believe this is the right thing to do. And so, you know, when you're in it, you know, you have to make a decision if you want to continue to be amongst a project or working with that client, in hopes that at least it'll somehow impact change with your presence being in that project. However, you know, what I now say up front is, you know, here's who I am, here's what I do, and here is what I believe. And as far as, you know, especially if it's open enough for them to want to know who you are, and they want to bring you on, and there's an opportunity for you to let them know, you know, before they set their scope about what they want from you, you let them know what you do and what you're grounded in. And then, you know, and what I have done too with, you know, I've had the you know, privilege to be able to express, like, you know, this is an issue, and I'm having some challenges with this, because, you know, this is the type of work that I do, and I'm for what's truth and justice and what's right with people, and particularly oppressed people. And so I'm going to continue this path. Now, if this is something that, you know, it doesn't look like we're going on the same path, that we will have to cut some ties, or we're going to have to make some changes here. So I think that, you know, some of those things that can be said up front with where you stand and what you hear me? Can you all hear me? I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, okay, I'm sorry, it was muted. But the things that you can kind of say up front, then you say up front. And then, you know, if you have to make a decision, if it doesn't sit well with you, if it doesn't feel right within you, then you'll have to make those decisions to close those things off. You know, I try to do, especially if there's a contract involved and what their expectations are, I try to make sure that I can get out of that contract if there are certain circumstances that that would have me to pause and cut ties. I try to make sure that that's in my contractual agreement, where it's I'm open to leave without any issues happening. That's one thing I've begun to do with contracts, with in particularly large contracts and more detailed contracts, and I can look at it and say, okay, here's my scope, and here's what I want to do, or here's what you ask for me to do, and here's what I am to do, can do. But, you know, if this go awry, we're going separate ways, and that's okay. You know, that's what I've been doing now, paying attention to those things too.
Thank you. We'll close with, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. And then we'll pose the same question to Dr. Robert Adams. How do you stay true to social justice or anti-racist values? What do you do if the entire entity hiring you doesn't care about what the community wants or values? And when do you decide to reject a client's proposal or try to change their values?
So I think I try to use a Kingian approach. And what I mean by that is that I believe that by engaging people, you can make transformations, maybe not the complete transformation that you want to make, but that you can witness for social justice. So I would say that a lot of what I think about is, if somebody's going to hire me, there must be some opportunity in that organization. Maybe the leadership hasn't bought in yet, but there's some people that have similar values to me that need support and that need the possibility to create that transformation. So that's how I try to think about it. I try to see what's the overall organization trying to doing, what are individuals that are allies doing inside the organization, how can I support them? And just to think about what are the opportunities for transformation. Because I believe that a lot of times there's oftentimes a lot more openings inside than it appear from the outside. And to sort of engage in that and try to figure out what are the levers of change. Because in general, I think we're always operating with institutions and against institutions that haven't had our best interest at heart, right? So we've become not, I wouldn't say expert at responding to that, but that there's no comfort or aid in just working with the people that are like-minded, that sometimes you have to go witness in enemy territory and try to change those minds and hearts. And again, I go back to the idea that sometimes even failing at that provides great lessons and builds up your muscles for the next great encounter with social injustice. But social justice and equity have to always be at the forefront of your anthropological practice if you really want to be both ethical and a transformative agent in this world.
Thank you so much, and I think those are like wonderful comments to end on. I want to thank Drs. Robert Adams, Dr. Raymond Codrington, Dr. Arvenita Washington Cherry, and Dr. Alicia Winn for joining us today. This has been a great event. And I also want to tell the audience to please consider attending other ABA and AAA Raising Our Voices events that are going to be happening over the next couple of weeks. But thank you again, and thank you very much for your participation.
Great job, Dr. Lee.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
All right, take care, everyone.